Our 7-day journey through the south of France begins in Marseille, a Mediterranean port city and our starting point for exploring Provence. Marseille's connection to the sea is immediately apparent along its waterfront, where fishing boats and luxury yachts share the harbor. The old port provides our first glimpse of Mediterranean life, with waterfront cafes overlooking the marina and the city rising around it. If time allows, one of the city's major landmarks is the Basilica of Notre-Dame de la Garde, perched high above Marseille. Its elevated position provides panoramic views stretching across the city and out toward the Mediterranean Sea. Between the harbor below and the viewpoints above, Marseille gives us a very different beginning from the smaller provincial towns we'll encounter later in the trip. We're only spending part of our first day here, so this isn't intended to be a complete tour of Marseille. Instead, it's our introduction to the Mediterranean side of southern France and the starting point for the journey ahead. After exploring the waterfront and taking in some of the city, we're leaving Marseille behind and traveling inland toward Aix-en-Provence. The drive from Marseille Airport to Aix-en-Provence takes about 30 minutes, so it doesn't take long before the surroundings begin to change and our first day moves from the Mediterranean waterfront into Provence. Arriving in Aix-en-Provence brings a noticeable change from the busy Mediterranean setting of Marseille. Aix is known for its tree-lined boulevards, elegant fountains, outdoor cafes, historic buildings, and walkable streets. It's a place that lends itself to slowing down and exploring on foot rather than simply moving from one attraction to the next. One of the city's best-known avenues is the Cours Mirabeau, shaded by towering plane trees and lined with restaurants, boutiques, and historic mansions. From there, the narrow streets of the old town lead through picturesque squares and hidden courtyards. Saint-Sauveur Cathedral is another historic landmark found within this part of the city. As evening approaches, Aix-en-Provence also gives us our first opportunity to experience some of the regional foods associated with Provence. Local menus can include duck confit, provincial lamb, fresh goat cheese, tapenade served with crusty bread, and local rosé. After beginning the day beside Marseille's Mediterranean waterfront, an evening walk through the streets of Aix gives our first day in the south of France a much quieter finish. Day 2 takes us away from the cities and into the Loup-Rhône, an area of Provence known for hilltop villages, vineyards, lavender fields, and rolling countryside. Leaving Aix-en-Provence, the drive to Gordes takes approximately 1 hour, bringing us into a very different part of southern France. Gordes is frequently listed among the most beautiful villages in France, and its location is a major reason why. The village rises above the surrounding valley, with stone houses built along the hillside. From a distance, the buildings appear to cascade down the slope, creating one of the most recognizable views in Provence. Once inside the village, narrow cobblestone lanes wind between old stone buildings, small cafes, and artisan shops. Gordes is compact enough to explore on foot, and walking provides a closer look at the stone architecture that gives the village much of its character. One of the best-known views of Gordes is found outside the village, looking back across the valley. From here, the hillside location becomes especially clear, with the village rising above the surrounding Provençal countryside. It's an impressive beginning to our second day and our first real look at the hilltop villages of the Loup-Rhône. A short drive from Gordes brings us to Saint-Jean Abbey, a 12th-century abbey surrounded by the countryside of Provence. The abbey is especially well known for the lavender fields planted nearby, which create one of the region's most recognizable scenes when they bloom during late June and early July. The abbey itself is an example of Romanesque architecture, and its relatively simple stone construction fits naturally into the surrounding landscape. Visitors can see the abbey, its gardens, and the countryside while learning about the religious community that continues here. Monks still live and work at the abbey today. Even when the lavender isn't in bloom, the combination of the centuries-old abbey and its isolated countryside setting makes Saint-Jean a distinctive stop between Gourd and our next destination. Our final major stop today is Roussillon, another hilltop village of the Loup-Rhône, but one that looks dramatically different from Gourd. Instead of the gray and pale stone seen elsewhere in Provence, Roussillon is known for shades of red, orange, and gold created by the natural ochre deposits found in the surrounding landscape. Those colors aren't limited to the cliffs. They also appear throughout the village, giving many of the buildings and streets the same warm earth tones found in the nearby landscape. As the sunlight changes during the day, the colors can appear different as well, making Roussillon immediately recognizable among the villages of Provence. One of the best-known places to experience these colors is the Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat or Ochre Trail. The walking trail passes through an area shaped by the ochre deposits, providing a much closer look at the colorful formations that helped make Roussillon famous. Back in the village, narrow streets, colorful buildings, local art galleries, cafes, and views across the rooftops provide plenty to explore on foot. Late afternoon can be especially striking here as sunlight falls across the cliffs and buildings, emphasizing the reds, oranges, and golds that distinguish Roussillon from the other places we're visiting. It's a colorful finish to a day that began among the pale stone buildings of Gourd. Day 3 brings us to Avignon, one of the most historically important cities in Provence. Surrounded by remarkably well-preserved medieval walls, Avignon combines centuries of history with busy squares, cafes, narrow streets, and views toward the Rhône River. During the 14th century, Avignon became the seat of the Catholic papacy, a period that permanently changed the city and left behind some of the landmarks that define it today. Entering the old town through the walls brings us into a compact historic center that is especially well suited to exploring on foot. Narrow streets, past bakeries, cafes, boutiques, old buildings, and small squares. Unlike some historic destinations where the major attractions stand apart from everyday life, much of Avignon's history is woven directly into the center of the modern city. Another important part of Avignon's history is the Pont Saint-Benazet, commonly known as the Pont d'Avignon. Construction of the medieval bridge began in the 12th century, and although only part of it survives today, the remaining arches extend into the Rhône River. The bridge has become one of Avignon's most recognizable landmarks and provides another reminder of just how long this city has occupied an important position along the river. The Place de l'Horloge is one of the central gathering places within the old city. Cafes and restaurants surround the square, making this part of Avignon noticeably livelier than some of the quieter streets nearby. It's also an example of something we'll see repeatedly during this trip. Historic architecture isn't isolated behind museum doors. It remains part of the places where people walk, eat, meet, and spend their day. Avignon is also a good place to experience the foods and wines of Provence. Regional menus can include slow-cooked beef dishes, herb-roasted chicken, tomato tarts, goat cheeses, and other seasonal foods. Wines from the surrounding Rhône Valley are also closely connected with this part of southern France. But the event that most dramatically shaped Avignon occurred centuries ago, when the city became home to the popes. That history brings us to the enormous Gothic structure at the heart of the old city and our next stop, the Palace of the Popes. Leaving Avignon behind, we travel about 20 minutes north to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, one of the world's best-known wine regions. The village is surrounded by vineyards stretching across the rolling countryside, where winemaking has been closely connected with this area for centuries. The region is particularly known for its red wines, although white wines are also produced. But Châteauneuf-du-Pape isn't only about wine. Stone streets climb through the village toward the ruins of a medieval castle overlooking the surrounding countryside. From this higher ground, views extend across vineyards and the Rhône Valley, showing just how closely the village and its wine production are tied to the landscape. And because we're traveling by car, this is also one of those stops where having a designated driver or arranging transportation from Avignon makes good sense. After a day that began within the medieval walls of Avignon, the vineyards and countryside of Châteauneuf-du-Pape give us a very different look at this part of Provence. Day 4 takes us away from Provence and toward the Mediterranean coast, but we're taking the scenic route through the Verdon Gorge. Often called the Grand Canyon of Europe, the gorge is known for towering limestone cliffs and the striking blue-green water of the Verdon River below. Winding mountain roads lead through the area, with overlooks providing views into the canyon and across the surrounding landscape. Lake St. Croix sits at the western end of the gorge, where kayaking, canoeing, and paddleboats are popular during the warmer months. This is one of those drives where getting from one destination to another becomes part of the day's experience. As we eventually leave the mountains behind and continue toward Nice, the landscape begins another dramatic change as we approach the Mediterranean coast. Arriving in Nice marks one of the biggest changes in scenery during our 7-day journey. The hilltop villages, vineyards, and lavender country of Provence give way to palm-lined streets, Mediterranean architecture, busy harbors, beaches, and the blue water of the Côte d'Azur. We've reached the French Riviera, and Nice gives us an excellent base for exploring this part of southern France. Nice sits along the Bay of Angels, with the city stretching beside the Mediterranean. One of its best-known features is the Promenade des Anglais, the long seaside promenade running along the waterfront. Locals and visitors use it for walking, jogging, cycling, or simply spending time beside the sea. The promenade also provides an easy introduction to the relationship between Nice and its coastline, something that becomes difficult to miss almost anywhere near the center of the city. The beaches here may look different from what some visitors expect. Much of Nice's shoreline consists of smooth pebbles rather than soft sand. The water and broad coastal views, however, are a major part of the city's identity, and the waterfront remains active throughout the day. Away from the shoreline, Nice reveals another side of itself through its architecture and public spaces. Buildings in warm Mediterranean colors line streets and squares, while balconies, shutters, decorative facades, monuments, and fountains add detail throughout the city. Nice has developed over centuries, and its appearance reflects several periods rather than one single architectural style. The Old Town, known as Via Nice, is one of the most distinctive parts of the city. Narrow streets wind between closely packed buildings filled with restaurants, bakeries, cafes, shops, and gelato stands. Small squares open unexpectedly between the streets, giving the old center a very different feeling from the wide boulevards found elsewhere in Nice. Nice also has a strong connection with art and museums. The city and surrounding region attracted numerous artists, and today museums and galleries form another part of its cultural landscape. Higher viewpoints around Nice provide a completely different perspective, looking across the rooftops toward the waterfront, harbor, and Mediterranean beyond. The port adds yet another character to the city. Boats and yachts share the harbor, while colorful buildings rise behind the waterfront. This combination of working city, seaside destination, and Mediterranean port helps explain why Nice feels different depending on which neighborhood you're exploring. Shopping ranges from small stores tucked into the older streets to larger commercial areas in the center of the city. But wandering is really part of the experience here. A street that begins with shops may lead into a square filled with cafes, while another route suddenly opens toward the sea. And then there's the food. Nice has its own regional specialties influenced by its Mediterranean location. Salade niçoise is probably the best known outside France, while saka is a local specialty made from chickpea flour. Stuffed vegetables, grilled fish, seafood dishes and Provençal arrosé also appear on menus throughout the area. Restaurants spill onto sidewalks and squares, particularly in and around the Old Town, making food an especially visible part of the city. Whether it's a full evening meal, something from a bakery, gelato, or a stop at a cafe, there are plenty of opportunities to slow down between sightseeing. What makes Nice especially useful on a south of France itinerary is the variety concentrated within a relatively small area. Beaches and waterfront promenades sit close to historic streets, museums, shopping areas, restaurants, viewpoints, and the harbor. You can move between very different surroundings without leaving the city. By evening, the waterfront becomes an obvious place to return. The Promenade des Anglais follows the curve of the Bay of Angels, with the Mediterranean stretching beyond it. After spending the previous several days among the inland cities and villages of Provence, we've now reached an entirely different side of southern France. Nice isn't simply another stop along the route. It marks our arrival on the French Riviera, where the Mediterranean coast becomes the setting for the next part of our journey. Wake up to the sights and sounds of the Mediterranean as you begin your first full day of the south of France itinerary on the French Riviera. Nice offers an appealing mix of history, culture, beaches, and vibrant markets, making it an excellent base for exploring the surrounding coastline. Rather than rushing between attractions, today is designed to let you enjoy the relaxed pace that has drawn visitors to the Riviera for generations. Start your day in Old Town, where colorful buildings, narrow alleyways, and bustling cafes create one of the city's most charming neighborhoods. As you wander the winding streets, you'll discover artisan shops selling handmade soaps, lavender products, olive wood kitchenware, local spices, and regional wines. One of the highlights is the Cour Esseau market, where vendors offer fresh vegetables, flowers, cheeses, baked goods, and provincial specialties. Arriving early gives you the best selection and allows you to experience the lively atmosphere before the crowds build. Pause for breakfast at a sidewalk cafe and enjoy a buttery croissant or pain au chocolat with a cup of rich French coffee while watching the city come to life. Although the medieval castle no longer stands, Castle Hill offers some of the finest views along the French Riviera. Beautiful gardens, waterfalls, and shaded walking paths make this a peaceful escape from the busy streets below. Dining outdoors while watching sailboats drift across the bay is one of the simple pleasures of visiting Nice. Only about 15 minutes east of Nice, Villefranche-sur-Mer provides a noticeable change of pace. The town sits beside a deep natural harbor that has welcomed ships for centuries, with colorful buildings rising from the waterfront and narrow streets, climbing through the older sections of town. The harbor remains one of the defining features of Villefranche-sur-Mer. Boats sit against the Mediterranean backdrop, while waterfront cafes and restaurants line portions of the shore. Compared with the much larger city of Nice, the scale here makes it easier to slow down and explore without trying to move between a long list of major attractions. Away from the water, narrow streets, stairways, small galleries, and the old fishing district provide another side of the town. The changes in elevation mean that streets and stairways often lead to different views across the rooftops and toward the harbor below. Villefranche-sur-Mer is also a good place to include some beach time in a south of France itinerary. The sheltered waterfront and clear Mediterranean water make swimming and relaxing beside the shore popular activities during warmer weather. What makes this stop work especially well is its proximity to Nice. In only a short trip along the coast, we've moved from one of the Riviera's major cities into a much smaller Mediterranean community, with its own harbor, beaches, old streets, and waterfront. After spending the afternoon here, it's an easy return to Nice, where the Promenade des Anglais and the Mediterranean shoreline provide a natural place to finish our first full day on the French Riviera. Day 6 begins high above the Mediterranean in Ise, one of the hilltop villages of the French Riviera. Stone buildings, narrow cobblestone lanes, old walls, and viewpoints across the coastline give this small village a setting very different from the seaside communities we've been exploring. Much of Ise is best experienced simply by walking. Its narrow streets pass art galleries, artisan workshops, small cafes, perfume boutiques, and courtyards tucked between the old stone buildings. Because the village rises steeply above the coast, climbing through the streets gradually reveals wider views of the Mediterranean below. At the highest point of the village is the exotic garden. The garden occupies the site of the former castle and combines a collection of plants with panoramic viewpoints overlooking the surrounding coastline. From this elevation, views extend toward Nice and Monaco. Perfume production is also closely associated with this part of southeastern France. Near Ise, perfume houses offer tours explaining how fragrances are produced and how flowers and other aromatic materials are used in the process. The perfume industry has particularly strong historical ties to nearby Grasse and the surrounding region. Between its elevated setting, stone streets, Mediterranean views, gardens, and perfume traditions, Ise packs quite a bit into a very small village. From here, our route continues along the Riviera towards somewhere considerably smaller as a country, but considerably bigger in reputation. A short drive along the Mediterranean brings us into the Principality of Monaco. It is the world's second smallest independent country after Vatican City, yet an impressive amount is concentrated within its borders. Monaco is known internationally for luxury hotels, yachts, expensive real estate, motorsport, and the famous casino district, but there is more here than its glamorous reputation suggests. Monte Carlo is probably the name most people immediately associate with Monaco. This district contains the famous casino along with luxury hotels, landscaped gardens, upscale shops, and some of the Principality's best-known architecture. Even without entering the casino, the surrounding streets and buildings make Monte Carlo one of Monaco's most recognizable areas. Luxury cars are a common sight, but some of the most impressive displays of wealth are found along the waterfront. Port Hercule is Monaco's principal deepwater harbor and is regularly filled with large private yachts. Restaurants and buildings rise around the harbor, while the surrounding hills create a natural backdrop behind the waterfront. Monaco is also closely associated with Formula One racing. The Monaco Grand Prix has been held on streets through the Principality since 1929. Unlike races held on permanent circuits, the course uses Monaco's existing streets, running through an environment of buildings, barriers, elevation changes, and tight corners. Outside race preparations and race weekend, these are ordinary public roads. Moving away from Monte Carlo and uphill brings us to Monacoville, the Principality's historic old town. This part of Monaco occupies a rocky headland overlooking the Mediterranean and has a noticeably different character from the casino district and modern waterfront below. The Prince's Palace stands here and serves as the official residence of Monaco's sovereign prince. The Grimaldi family has been associated with Monaco for centuries. Visitors arriving at the appropriate time may also see the changing of the guard outside the palace. Nearby stands the Cathedral of Our Lady Immaculate, often called Monaco Cathedral or St. Nicholas Cathedral. The cathedral contains the tombs of members of Monaco's ruling family, including Prince Rainier III and Princess Grace. The old town also contains museums, cafes, residential streets, gardens, and overlooks across the Principality and Mediterranean. Because Monaco occupies such a small area, very different parts of the country can appear remarkably close together. From elevated viewpoints, the contrast becomes especially apparent. Historic Monacoville, modern high-rise buildings, the harbor, yachts, roads, and the Mediterranean are compressed into a remarkably small landscape. Monaco may be famous for wealth and glamour, but spending time here reveals several distinct sides of the principality. Monte Carlo presents the casinos and luxury most visitors expect. The harbor demonstrates Monaco's connection with the Mediterranean, while Monacoville provides a much older historical center overlooking everything below. After several hours exploring one of the smallest countries in the world, we're returning along the Riviera toward Nice. But before reaching the city, we have one more stop on a peninsula extending into the Mediterranean. Our final stop today is Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, a Mediterranean peninsula located between Monaco and Nice. The surroundings here provide a noticeable change of pace. Walking paths follow portions of the coastline, with views across clear Mediterranean water, rocky coves, gardens, and the surrounding Riviera. The peninsula's setting has also made it home to some impressive villas and estates. One of the best known is Villa Efrasy de Rothschild, an early 20th century villa surrounded by extensive themed gardens overlooking the sea. The property was created by Beatrice de Rothschild and today is open to visitors. Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat gives us a quieter finish after a day that began in the hilltop streets of Ease and continued through Monaco. From here, it's only a short journey back toward Nice and the Mediterranean waterfront. Our final day begins in Antibes, a coastal town between Nice and Cannes where the historic center sits close to the Mediterranean. The old town is compact enough to explore on foot, with narrow stone streets running between old buildings, cafes, shops, and small public spaces. Portions of the historic walls remain along the waterfront, giving Antibes a very different appearance from some of the larger Riviera destinations we've visited. One of the town's gathering places is the Provençal market, where stalls feature regional foods and products. The market sits within the old town, making it easy to include while exploring the surrounding streets. Cafes and restaurants are also scattered throughout this part of Antibes, so there's no need to rush through the historic center. Antibes also has a strong connection with art. The Picasso Museum occupies the Château Grimaldi, a historic building overlooking the Mediterranean. Pablo Picasso used part of the chateau as a studio for several months in 1946, and works he created during that period became part of the museum's collection. Today, the museum contains works by Picasso as well as other artists. Another reminder of the area's long history is Fort Carré, a 16th-century fort overlooking the harbor and surrounding coastline. Its position provided an important defensive viewpoint, and the fort remains one of the most recognizable historic structures around Antibes. Then there's the marina. Antibes has long been connected with the sea, but today's harbor creates an interesting contrast between different periods of the town's history. Traditional boats can be found near modern yachts, including some extremely large private vessels. Old stone fortifications rise nearby, while the Mediterranean provides the backdrop for the entire waterfront. Antibes also has sandy beaches, something that makes the coastline here noticeably different from the pebble beaches we encountered in Nice. Between the beaches, harbor, old town, historic walls, museums, and cafes, Antibes manages to offer quite a bit without feeling like a large city. From here, we continue west along the Mediterranean coast to Cannes. The name is recognized around the world because of the Cannes Film Festival, which has been held here since 1946. During the festival, filmmakers, actors, journalists, and members of the film industry arrive from around the world, placing Cannes at the center of international attention. But the city doesn't disappear when the festival ends. Cannes remains a busy Mediterranean destination throughout the year, with beaches, shopping, restaurants, hotels, a large marina, and historic neighborhoods beyond the famous festival locations. One of its best-known waterfront streets is the Boulevard de la Croisette. The boulevard follows the coastline beside sandy beaches and is lined with palm trees, luxury hotels, designer boutiques, and restaurants. It's the polished, glamorous side of Cannes that helped establish the city's international image. The waterfront is also an easy place to simply walk and watch what's happening around the harbor and beaches. Cannes combines an active city center with a resort atmosphere, so the surroundings can change considerably within a relatively short distance. For another side of Cannes, we can leave the modern waterfront and head into Le Souquet, the city's historic quarter. This is the older part of Cannes, where steep streets climb above the harbor between closely packed buildings. The higher elevation provides viewpoints across the city, harbor, Mediterranean, and the Bay of Cannes. Looking down from this part of town makes the contrast especially clear. The old streets of Le Souquet sit above the modern waterfront, luxury hotels, beaches, and marinas below. That's one of the things that makes Cannes more interesting than its glamorous reputation might suggest. The film festival and luxury hotels may receive most of the international attention, but they're only one part of the city. Beaches, historic streets, waterfront cafes, shopping areas, hillside viewpoints, and the harbor all exist within the same destination. Antibes and Cannes have given us two different stops for our final day. Antibes brought us old walls, historic streets, art, beaches, and a harbor filled with boats and yachts. Cannes gives us another combination of old and new, from the historic streets above the city to one of the most famous waterfronts on the French Riviera. As daylight begins to fade over Cannes, we're not going anywhere else. For the first time during this 7-day journey, there isn't another destination waiting down the road. As night settles over the French Riviera, our 7-day journey through the south of France finally slows to a stop. We began in Marseille and Aix-en-Provence before leaving the cities behind for the hilltop villages and countryside of Provence. From there, the route carried us through centuries of history, wine country, mountain scenery, and eventually back to the Mediterranean. What stands out most about this journey is how quickly southern France can change. One day we were walking through old stone villages above the countryside. Another found us surrounded by vineyards. Then came the limestone cliffs and blue-green water of the Verdon Gorge before the mountains gave way to the coastline of the French Riviera. Once we reached the Mediterranean, the journey changed again. There were beaches and harbors, old towns and modern cities, quiet coastal communities, and Monaco's unmistakable display of luxury. Some places were made for wandering through narrow streets. Others were best appreciated from a viewpoint high above the water. 7 days isn't enough to see everything the south of France has to offer, and it was never supposed to be. It's enough time to discover just how much variety exists here and to perhaps figure out which places you'd want to spend more time exploring on your next trip. Or better yet, exploring new places you wanted to see but didn't get to on this trip. Tonight there is no next stop and no road to follow tomorrow morning. Cannes is where this particular journey ends. And after 7 days traveling from Provence to the French Riviera, that's not a bad place to turn off the map.